So what is a resilient leader? We covered the CAF domains, looked at that. But what is a resilient leader? I found this definition from Joseph Folkman. There are many definitions, but they're basically the same. Recover quickly. I love those words. Recover quickly. Positive attitude, a strong sense of opportunity during periods of turbulence. We all can relate to periods of turbulence, whether it's being promoted or it's getting ready to promote. I remember when I was enlisted and I was getting ready to study. That was some of the tough times to pass a test. And I was like, how come the officers, they just get promoted? They don't have to take a test. That's not fair. We need to change that, General Fletcher. You're in the Pentagon, sir. Let's change that policy, right? He said, I'm good. I like testing. I'm good. I'm a senior master sergeant, chief select, no problem. I'll just meet a board. I don't have to test. But let me tell you, it was one of the most stressful times. I'm just giving you an example. Or as an officer, when we were getting ready to put our, what we call PRF together. And they're hopefully changing that, where it's one line. That's what we've said may happen. But think about that, cramming all of your duty into one line or one piece of paper, your whole career, and everything relies on what that one piece of paper says that if you're going to get promoted or not. So I can go on and on of examples of turbulence in our lives, or times when it's stressful, times when it's tough. But then how do we become resilient? Next slide. All right, 7 traits that I found in this Forbes magazine. 1,300 of the top leaders were surveyed. And out of those 1,300, these are the traits that they found that made people most resilient. Okay, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. So resilience, the ability to survive a crisis and thrive in a world of uncertainty. They are communicating powerfully. They are coachable, building positive and trusting relationship, bold risk takers, develops others, champions change, one of my favorite. I love change, and I'll tell you some stories about that. And then finally, decisive. You have to be decisive. If you're going to be a resilient leader, you have to be decisive. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the first one, we have to communicate powerfully. You've all seen those videos say, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And it is so essential that we communicate. The mission stops when we don't communicate. Resilience lacks when we don't communicate. I'm not going to go through all of these, of course, but involve these simple communication processes, active listening. So what I hear you saying is, what you want me to do is, you got feedback. What? What is feedback? We actually need to use these things as resilient leaders. Agreed communication protocol. Are we going to be respectful? Are we going to be using foul language when we're talking to one another? Are we going to elevate and escalate? Are we going to invalidate when we're talking to one another? Are we going to just withdraw when things get tough? So protocols say no. We're going to have effective, clear communication. That is the key. Messaging, you know that. Most of the successful companies that we know, the reason they're successful is the message and how they put out the message. Okay, so messaging is very important. So a fair process in communication. All right, next slide. Here's a person who I believe communicated effectively and powerfully that it was time for change. He was a resilient leader. This is General Bernard Schriever. Now, General Schriever had this idea that we need to have ICBMs. Of course, if you look closely on my uniform, you will see this rocket. That is the person who is considered the father of missiles and space, right here. Now, I know most of you don't know him. I understand that. But here's the point. He knew in the time of the Cold War that we needed positiveness. We needed to overcome. We needed change. So he had to communicate his message. In fact, he and General Curtis LeMay, who flew the B-52s, were at conflict. Curtis LeMay was his boss. But General Schriever was this up-and-coming person, flew B-17s early in his lifetime. But he says, we need a new paradigm shift. which were the ICBMs. I'll give you another fact that you probably don't know about General Schriever, is that he started what was called Air Research and Development, or he was appointed over the Air Research and Development Division in the early 50s. And then later in 1959, Air Research and Development Command. You know why is that significant? That's where we come from. Then he took over as AFSC, Air Force Systems Command, which eventually became Air Force Materiel Command. Right here, your first commander. Now, look what he said. He says the world has seen an ample supply of people who can come up with a dozen reasons why a new idea will not work. See, you got to communicate. And should not be tried. But the people who produce progress are a breed apart. They have these three things. I hope you write these down: imagination, courage, and persistence. Okay, if you're going to be resilient, if you're going to communicate powerfully, you got to have imagination, and you definitely got to have the courage, and you have to have the persistence to find solutions, to tell others your vision. And so he predicted that air superiority and space superiority will be critical to the survival of our nation. Right after he said this quote, 8 months later, the Russians launched Sputnik. Isn't that amazing? This guy was a visionary, but he communicated the message. All right? So we can learn from these people, our forefathers, if you will, of military, in the military, to help us to become more resilient.